It's been 5 months since this monumental judgment that the SNP are still shamefully refusing to implement in law. In Scotland, we have nurses suspended for refusing to share changing rooms with biologically male colleagues, policies that allow for dangerous biological males in male genital to serve in women's prisons, guidance allowing for transgender offenders to be strip-searched by both male and female police officers, school guidance stating that young people, where possible, are able to use the facilities they feel more comfortable with, teachers being called transphobic for expressing legitimate concerns over the provision of unisex toilets, Scottish Government lawyers arguing that men can become pregnant. All of this could have been avoided if the law was properly implemented in the first place by the SNP government. Presiding officer, I am not just disappointed at the Scottish Government has refused to follow the law. I'm appalled. Appalled that this government has tried to silence us at every point. Appalled that during the consideration of the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, SNP ministers prioritised meeting with gender extremists that supported this dangerous bill. How could we forget that the First Minister at the time, Nicola Sturgeon, said that opponents of this bill were deeply misogynist, often homophobic, possibly some of them racist as well. And of course, when Nicola Sturgeon and other members of her government, including John Sweeney, were asked if a male double rapist is a woman, they shamefully dodged the question. But actions speak louder than words. The SNP government has wasted over £20 million in taxpayers' money to fund gender extremist organisations that are desperate to strip women and girls of their rights. This includes more than £3.6 million to the Equality Network in Scottish Trans, more than £2 million to the LGBT Youth Scotland, and more than £250,000 to Stonewall Scotland. On the subject of wasting taxpayers' money, let us not forget that the taxpayer-funded institutions such as Scotland's National Library had initially caved into the woke mob by refusing to include gender-critical books such as The Woman Who Wouldn't Wish as part of their exhibitions. And of course, this decision was reversed after the Scottish Conservatives called it out. Presiding officer, just imagine if the shoe was on the other foot. Imagine if the Supreme Court had ruled in favour of the Scottish Government. We would not have heard the end of it. However, because the SNP did not get their way, they are dragging their heels. A recent report by the Ethical Standard Commission highlighted the tendency of policymakers to seek to apply their own policies rather than following the national law, resulting in legal cases. In fact, this government has spent hundreds and thousands of pounds in legal costs, with taxpayers footing the bill. They have already lost 2 major court battles, and hopefully justice prevails in Sandy Peggle's fight against the NHS as well. Yet, failure to implement what has been set out so clearly by the Supreme Court and by the EHRC will lead to more legal challenges. Just last weekend, it was confirmed that there will be another legal challenge from For Women Scotland over flawed trans guidance for schools and prisons. It is becoming clear that our voices as women do not matter for the law or this SNP Scottish Government. Minister, women and girls deserve answers, so I have a very simple question for the Minister. The Supreme Court judgment, will the Supreme Court judgment immediately be implemented by the Scottish Government? Happy to give way.
Minister Cook-Upstewart.
Thank you. The Scottish Government has always said that we accept the ruling of the Supreme Court judgment. That is not a contentious issue, and we are working at pace to review and to implement guidance as as necessary. That's not under question.
Pam Gozo.
As expected, no, yes or no. That's all I wanted, a simple answer from yourself, Minister. Let me be very clear today. I will continue this fight against this toxic gender ideology for every woman and girl in Scotland. It is my #1 priority that I will continue to hold this SNP government to account. No matter how many hurdles are thrown our way, no matter how many times they try and silence us, no matter how many times they try and slander us, women won't wish and women won't wait.
Presiding Officer, when the Supreme Court was founded in 2009 under a previous Labour government, it finally removed judges from the House of Lords and separated the different arms of the state. Politicians might make the law, but it was independent judges who would decide whether it was being appropriately and fairly applied. In April, the Supreme Court did just that, when it ruled that a woman is defined by biological sex under equalities law. As Lord Hodge said at the time, this isn't about pitting one group against the other, but about interpreting the meaning of the Equality Act of 2010. A court is a place to settle debates and clear up confusion. At the time of the ruling, the current First Minister was among those who said that the ruling gave clarity. And I agree. And he pledged to engage in the implications of the ruling, and I think we can all agree that that was the sensible thing to do. So I have to ask myself, why, nearly 6 months on, are we having this debate? It should be simple. The court has clarified the law. We are all bound by the law. We should respect it. We should implement it. There is no need to wait for more guidance or consultations to follow the law. We can start the process now. All we're asking is for the Scottish Government to follow the law. They cannot both be lawmakers and lawbreakers, because just as the Supreme Court provides clarity to the Scottish Government, there are countless public sector employers in Scotland who rely on the Scottish Government to provide clarity to them. And if the Scottish Government will not show leadership, who do they turn to? Because the First Minister could issue a letter today to public bodies underlining the position and reminding bodies that they need to act in accordance with the law. Failure to do so will simply lead to more expensive court challenges, such as the Sandy Peggy case in NHS Fife, and we know this is costing the public purse a huge amount of money when the NHS, frankly, is in crisis. Other cases are in the pipeline because the Scottish Government are intent on delay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It doesn't give me any pleasure to speak in this afternoon's debate, but I'm doing it because it's important that those who do not welcome the Supreme Court's judgment, those who have had their lives made considerably worse by it, are represented in our Parliament today. This debate frames women's rights as if they are in conflict with trans rights. I want to state at the outset that is simply not true. Women's rights and trans rights are not in competition. They are deeply interwoven. Our struggle is a shared one against patriarchal structures that seek to police our bodies, define us narrowly, and limit our freedom. The Supreme Court's ruling has, in effect, rewritten the Equality Act to reduce the definition of woman and sex to so-called biological terms. In doing so, it has stripped away rights that many trans people relied upon and, crucially, it has made life harder, not safer, for all women, cis and trans alike. Since this ruling, hundreds of testimonies have poured in from people across Scotland and the UK. The report, A Community Living in Fear, published by Transaxial, captures the scale of the crisis. People are terrified. One trans woman described the ruling as profoundly dehumanising, saying, "It not only invalidates the lived realities of trans women like myself, but sends a broader message that we are to be excluded, further fueling discrimination, isolation and abuse that many of us already face daily." Another trans mother of a young son told how she now feels she cannot even take her child into the toilet in public. "I haven't been to a toilet outside of the house since, because now I am scared." Is this my future? I don't want my 3-year-old exposed to harassment just because of who I am. These are not abstract fears. They are daily lived realities. The ruling has emboldened those who wish to exclude, harass and intimidate. It has left people considering emigration, facing panic attacks and, heartbreakingly, openly discussing suicidal thoughts. And let us be very clear, this ruling does nothing to protect women. On the contrary, it places all women under greater scrutiny. As one cis woman explained, since this ruling, I find myself terrified. I'm using the words...
Ms Chapman, please resume your seat. I don't think the member was taking an intervention. No. Point of order, Richard Hamilton.
Order, presiding officer. I personally object to be calling a cis woman.
I thank Ms Hamilton for her point of order. What I would say, of course, is that we are a parliament. We will debate issues. And it is always the role, and if I could finish, it is always the role of the Chair to protect the rights of members to scrutinise, to debate robustly and to challenge each other robustly. I've heard the language that the member used. I don't think that the member was referring to any specific member by using that terminology. Obviously, the member has now heard that, for instance, Ms Hamilton would not regard that terminology vis-à-vis herself as being other than personally insulting, and therefore I hope that the member in question would not use that terminology as far as that member is concerned. But I think the member's use of the terminology was in a wider context. I don't think it was directed at Ms Hamilton. And with that, I would ask the member to resume.
Thank you, presiding officer. As one cis woman explained, since this ruling, I find myself terrified before I dress to go out in public. I'm unwilling to be an unauthentic version of me, but I keep thinking, maybe if I wear this, I'll be less likely to be misgendered or more likely to be left alone. This ruling will make everyone a judge of whether you are woman enough, end quote. That is the reality. This ruling narrows and polices womanhood, reinforcing patriarchal control instead of dismantling it. We must resist the false choice between women's rights and trans rights. When women are reduced to biology, we all lose. When trans people are denied dignity, we all lose. When rights are stripped away from any community, none of us is safe. I stand with women, I stand with trans people, I stand with all who refuse to be pitted against one another. Together, we must reject attempts to roll back rights and instead build a Scotland where every person, cis, trans and non-binary, can live free from fear, with dignity and with equal protection under the law. Thank you.
Thank you, presiding officer. And I join others in congratulating Pam Gosal on bringing this important debate to the chamber. Motions recognising this topic, including my own from back in April, recognise the unanimous judgment of the Supreme Court in For Women Scotland versus Scottish Ministers, which was delivered on the 16th of April this year. Yet 5 months on, government and legal advisers are oddly still trying to convince the people of Scotland that applying the clarity from the Apex Court is somehow complex. The ruling was clear, it was decisive, it was historic. The Supreme Court affirmed beyond doubt that the words woman and sex in the Equality Act of 2010 means biological woman and biological sex. The judgment was not only unanimous but necessary. And it's necessary because the Scottish Government has for far too long pursued policies, guidance and legislation that undermined the basic protections guaranteed to women under the Equality Act. And it was crucial because without this clarity, women's rights, hard won over generations, were being eroded in practice in front of our eyes. And I want to congratulate For Women Scotland, who are here with us in the chamber today, for their courage, for their persistence and for their dedication. And they did this against the odds, without the resources of government at their disposal, and they carried that fight all the way to the highest court, not for recognition, not for power, but for the fundamental principle that women's rights matter. and that those rights and those protections need to be rooted in biological sex. And the First Minister, I believe, hopefully is watching this debate this evening, must now honour the promise that he made to meet with 4 Women Scotland, who have now, of course, been forced to take the government back to the courts to make the government comply with the law. This is shameful, Minister. And this is not an abstract legal debate. It goes to the very heart of women's safety, their dignity and their equality. It has implications, as we all know, for women's prisons, for hospital wards, for women's sports and for every single sex service that women and girls depend upon. And it has implications for the support services available to women recovering from prostitution, from male violence and abuse. And it has implications for the principle of trust in the rule of law itself. If a unanimous judgment of the UK Supreme Court can be met with foot-dragging and confusion, then women in Scotland are really entitled to ask, whose side is this government really on?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have listened very, very carefully to all the contributors this afternoon in this debate. I won't be able to refer to everybody individually, but I will try to address as many points as I can that were raised. The Scottish Government has consistently made it clear that it accepts the Supreme Court ruling for Women Scotland Limited against the Scottish ministers in relation to the definition of the term woman in the Equality Act of 2010. And since April, we have been taking forward the detailed work that is necessary as a consequence of the ruling. Now, that work is ongoing and it's being coordinated by a senior-level cross-government working group that is convened by the Permanent Secretary. Our approach is,
Douglas Ross.
I'm sure the Minister has asked this question since it's gone right to the top with the Permanent Secretary. What timescale have civil servants given the Minister for when that work will be completed?
Minister.
I can't give you a timescale to that. There are so many different areas that the judgment actually sort of may or may not cover, and that work has to be done in a methodical way. So I was going on to say, to actually address that point, that the approach is focused on coordinating government action in the context of legal complexity, ensuring accuracy and clarity. I would also like to make clear that the decision of the Supreme Court does not remove trans people's protections from discrimination, and that was a point that was made explicitly by the Supreme Court in its judgment. And we have been clear since the Supreme Court ruling that we accept that. We're taking forward the work that is necessary as a consequence of it. And every key area of government which is or may be affected by the judgment is carrying out those assessments. I will.
Rachel Hamilton.
Presiding Officer, I'm slightly confused because if the Minister is getting this guidance out and about and going to act on the decision made by the Supreme Court, why is the Scottish Government going to challenge 4 Women Scotland in a challenge against this decision?
Yeah.
Minister.
Presiding Officer, you will be well aware that I will not comment on any live litigation cases. So to continue to give some examples of the work that we have done already. So we have already updated the guidance on the gender representation on Public Boards Scotland Act 2018. We have amended the recruitment process for the appointments to public bodies subject to the 2018 Act. And through joint working with Police Scotland, we will publicly consult on the Stop and Search Code of Practice before the end of this year. The Supporting Transgender Young People in Schools guidance is being reviewed, recognising that the EHRC are also reviewing the technical guidance for school. So, as I said, our approach is focused on ensuring accuracy and clarity, avoiding unnecessary complexity or confusion at a time where there is heightened public debate. I will.
Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, and I'm grateful to the Minister for taking the intervention. But I referred to a report by the Ethical Standards Commissioner, who is not known, for being outrageous, I think we could agree. And he's saying that policy is getting ahead of the law. You have a direct role in that. It doesn't require thinking through. It requires the government to say to its public bodies, don't get ahead of the law, follow the law. Why can't you do that?
Always through the chair. Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We have actually done that. I did sort of, remind myself of the fact that in May, we actually published our note that was sent to all public bodies, and it made it very clear that public bodies should satisfy themselves that they are compliant with the law and they are reviewing all the necessary guidance and policies. Because I know that that was raised by other people to imply that we had not offered that instruction, and we had. Thank you. So, just reminding the Parliament, also taking this opportunity, that equality for women and girls is a priority for this government, and I have heard very powerful testimonies this afternoon of why that is so important, and a reminder that it is at the heart of our vision for a fair and prosperous Scotland for everybody. And as a government, we are determined to deliver for women and girls and to address those inequalities where they arise. Can I just progress a little bit? I realise I'm running out of time here. I have taken interventions. So just to outline some of that work that we are doing, but I do want to again re-emphasise that the ongoing work on the implications of the Supreme Court judgment is not about pitting the rights of two groups of people against each other, but about equality, dignity and the rights of all. And I do want to make it clear that trans men and women are valued in society. They exist, they always have done, and they must enjoy the same human rights as all in society, as well as protections under the Equality Act. And I do sincerely believe that the vast majority of people in Scotland want to live in a country that is respectful, compassionate and caring and protects the rights of all. It is not a competition, and our work to support trans people in Scotland is absolutely not at the expense of our vital support for women and girls. So I do want to go on to just mention the work, the strategic work that is taking place on that, the First Minister's National Advisory Council on Women and Girls, and the voices and views of a diverse range of women and girls, including those on the Empowering Women's panel. The violence against women and girls was mentioned, and I want to highlight the Equally Safe, which is the world-leading strategy, and through that, by strengthening the laws that enable us to respond robustly to perpetrators and protect women and girls, for instance, through the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act of 2018. We've mentioned trauma-informed approaches, making sure we take those, especially for people who have experienced, women who have experienced sexual violence, and change the laws so that victims of rape and sexual assault can get the health care without having to report the assault to the police in the first place. Forgive me, I am going to make progress. I thank you for your leeway. I know I'm above my time. So we have taken forward a great deal of work to ensure that those working in the public sector are equipped with the resources and knowledge to confidently and sensitively work with those affected by violence against women and girls. Just a brief mention on the area of health. We published the first women's health plan in the UK, and currently we're working on the second phase of that process as well. And that led to achievements including the appointment of Scotland's first women's health champion, Professor Anna Glazier, as well.
Minister, please resume your seat for a second. Point of order, Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I cannot for the life of me believe that the Minister is talking to the motion presiding officer. It's very frustrating. We're trying to hold the government to account on not delivering the Supreme Court decision, and the Minister is talking about health plans and domestic violence.
I thank Ms Hamilton for her point of order. What I would say is that, having listened carefully to the Minister's response thus far, I know that she has specifically addressed issues that have been raised in the motion. I think what the Minister has been doing in the last minute or so is reflecting on wider actions that the government's taking, but on the basis also that time is now pressing, perhaps the Minister could bring her remarks to a close, focusing on indeed the issues raised in the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I will bring my remarks to a close. I hope that I have given reassurances that this government absolutely accepts the Supreme Court judgment. I have given clear examples of the actions that we are taking, and I would just like to just point out that actually, you know, the EHRC have only just recently, on the 5th of September, submitted their revised code of practice to the UK government, of which we have not yet seen, but it just is another demonstration and a sign that it is vital to take time to fully consider the impact of the judgment and its consequences.